I think we'll start, and I might need to help people catch up if they join us partway through. My name's John Haywood. Welcome to this webinar on the voice and the art of listening. While the context of the webinar is mainly virtual action learning, the art of listening can be practiced in any setting, virtual or otherwise. Um, so the context is virtual action learning, but we can practice our listening anywhere. So today's agenda, I'm going to introduce myself and our subject. I have a very brief survey for you so that I have an idea of who we have participating today. And I know some of you, so I know, and we work together. Um, I will define action learning and virtual action learning so that we all start with the same understanding. We're going to consider the voice and the richness of data available in the voice when we really focus on listening. We'll do a listening exercise to test what data we can pick up on, and we'll consider the benefits of working virtually. We'll offer some practical tips for successful virtual working, and then look at how and where action learning associates have applied virtual action learning. And there'll be some time for questions at the end. So about a year ago, I was asked to write a book chapter on virtual action learning. And in researching the chapter, I spoke to experienced virtual action learning practitioners from the US, the UK, and Canada. And what I'm sharing today is a combination of what I learned from those practitioners and my own experience of working virtually with action learning participants from 27 countries. Now, as it becomes increasingly common for working groups and teams to be geographically dispersed, we need to create more attractive and effective ways of interacting virtually. And if we can create virtual working spaces that are attractive, productive, enjoyable, and a highly regarded alternative to face-to-face meetings, our organizations save on travel time and cost, people have a better work-life balance, and all this could give organizations strong competitive advantage. And with less travel, of course, we all benefit from a reduced carbon footprint. So before we continue, I've just got a few questions for you, and there'll be a slight pause while I pull up a survey for you. So if you could just complete these questions, it just gives us an idea of who's in the room. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So what I'm seeing is that in terms of action learning and virtual action learning, there are some people with no experience at all, some with limited, quite a few with some experience, and some very experienced. So I'll try and aim my talk to all those groups. So if we go back now to the presentation. So here's a description, more than a definition of action learning. So action learning is a form of self-managed learning. It involves a group of peers who come together regularly over a period of time and look at the real-life challenges that they each face. It's a structured process, there's a discipline and a rigor to it, and it's based on asking open questions that explore and challenge. People work at some depth, maybe for an hour or more, and they use the critical thinking of their peers to help them come up with new solutions and fresh ideas. So over time, trust built in a group, and some of you will be very aware of this. And of course, people learn from the issues their peers have brought to the action learning group. So the purpose is not, the fundamental purpose is not to fix people from the outside by offering advice and telling them what to do. The purpose of action learning is to help people find their own solutions, their own motivations, and their own actions. So a definition of virtual action learning is simply action learning which takes place in a virtual environment via a range of enabling, interactive, and collaborative communications technologies. So virtual action learning, or VAL to shorten it, is simply action learning, but people aren't in the same room together. It's still a small group of people asking each other questions to help each other learn. And we use technology to get people into the same space. And we might use web-based technologies like Skype, Google Hangouts, WebEx, or Zoom, or we might use the telephone. So while the web-based technologies can offer a visual element, i.e. you can see your peers, which some people really value, I'm asking you today to concentrate on listening and to notice the quality of your attention when only using the voice and operating in this single sensory channel with no visual distraction. Now, back in 2007, the Guardian newspaper in the UK conducted an experiment, and they wanted to see when people could best detect when somebody was lying or when somebody was telling the truth. So they had people watch TV and they had people listen to the radio to see if they could spot lies. And here are the results. So when people were watching television, there was a less than 10% accuracy in spotting a lie. When people were listening to the radio, there was a 73% accuracy. So quite a difference there. So I have a question for you, and please put any answers or comments in the chat box again. So what's your reaction to this? What does that say to you? You might need a minute to think. So Siobhan, you're saying that the visual doesn't always help. Yeah, it can sometimes be a distraction. Yana, you believe more in pictures, so we tend to think pictures are more important. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, and Jeannie, visual input can detract from listening carefully. Absolutely, yeah. And Nikki, you're saying you're surprised as you thought body language was a key indicator, but this implies it's more about the voice. Um, there is that those experiments by a guy called Morabian who did experiments with body language, and we often see that where I can't remember quite the percentages, but very high percentage he's saying is of our communication is about body language. But it's thought that um, his experiments have been interpreted and simplified. So, and what he was doing was experiments with for people in conflict, where body language is obviously much more critical. So I think sometimes his interpretation of body language has been, or his the way we've interpreted his experiments has been misunderstood. And Carl, you said your ability to make judgments based on voice is stronger than your ability to make judgments based on visual stimulation. Yes. So we'll test that later. And Liz, no, you've introduced the Trump word. Um, that wasn't fair, but thank you. Makes me think of Trump and alternative facts. Yes. Okay, so thank you for doing that. So what I want to draw your attention to um, is the richness of data that's available in the voice if we let ourselves listen with our full attention. So here are some of the things you can hear. So pace, tone, volume, intonation, speed, silence, breath, breathing, content, intention, emotion, rhythm. So and lots more as well. So they're all giving us data to understand. So it makes me think if we half listen or multitask, like we might in conference calls, or are distracted by visuals while we're listening, what are we missing? So what I'm suggesting happens when we listen with our full attention, listening in this one sensory channel, is that we tune in deeply to the speaker and we start to hear, sense, and feel all the data that's available. So people say it feels very intimate, like somebody whispering in your ear. And the intimacy gives us the opportunity to build trust and to create a felt sense of safety for participants in the virtual space. Our imaginations are also sparked by listening, and Nancy Klein says that listening ignites the human mind. Let's go back one there. So you may know this phrase, the pictures are better on the radio. You may even have used it yourself. I've got two quotes here, and they are meant to illustrate this idea of heightened intimacy and imagination when we're listening with no visual distraction. So the first one is from a recent book by Adam Carroll Smith, and it's called The Pictures Are Better on the Radio. And here he talks about listening to a football match. And he says, most of all, I like the fact that listening to a match on the radio, alone in my bed, it was possible to feel intimately involved and incredibly close to the action, to really picture what was happening, despite being in my pajamas in the dark, hundreds of miles away. So that really gives you a sense of how imaginations are ignited, in Nancy Klein's words, by listening. The second quote is by Clive Anderson, broadcaster, writer, comedian. Um, and what he says is we tend to think that hearing something is somehow a secondary activity. And we assume that moving images, which demand our immediate focus, are more powerful. But radio, and listening, takes concentration. It has an inherent intimacy. And I think some of your comments reflect what Clive Anderson is saying there. So we've talked so far about the richness of data available in the voice, the intimacy that develops when we concentrate on listening, and the idea that our imaginations are more active when we simply listen. So we're going to test that now with an exercise. And this exercise was suggested by Ghislaine Collat at Ashridge Business School. So what I'm going to do is play a recording for you, and this is a real action learning presentation, and I have the presenter's permission to play it for you today. And it's about 9 minutes long, so you've got plenty of time to gather the data that you can hear. And then I'm going to ask you at the end of the recording what you heard, what you noticed. So I want to ask you, though, to join one of three groups and listen for different things. So each group will listen for something different. So if you want to join group one, I would like you to listen for emotion and feelings. So what emotions are you hearing in the speaker's voice? And here are some examples, the primary emotions there, like fear and shame and love. And then there are secondary feelings like anticipation, frustration, amusement, and so on. So that's group one, listening for emotions and feelings. Group two, I would like you to listen for content. So the words, the logic, and the sequence. And group three, I would like you to listen for intention, i.e., what's the underlying message? What's the person really saying? And what does the person really want to do? So you might need to use your intuition in this one. So can you please choose what you would like to listen for, but please just listen for one of those things. I'll just give you a minute to choose. And then can I check that we have someone in each group? So if you've decided to listen for emotion, please could you type the letter E in the chat box? Oh, you're already doing it. That's great. You preempted me. So you've put 1, 2, and 3. So that's absolutely fine. So we've got somebody in each group. That's perfect. Thank you very much. So there'll be a brief silence now while I just switch to the audio file, and then it will start. And as I said, it will last about 9 minutes.
When I started lecturing 20 years ago at the university, classroom sizes were smaller, and there was more administrative support for the academic staff. We had administrative tasks, but they felt more contained. Something that you could do in addition to the research that you really wanted to be doing. And then over the 20-year period until now, the administration has come to outweigh the space, the room for doing research and for doing good quality teaching. And everything became increasingly measured. And so I'm at a stage now, I find that, 18 months after leaving, I need to make some space for myself again. I need to assess what my options are. I need to make some strategic choices about what it is that I really want to do, where I'm going to get my greatest sense of satisfaction, both intellectually, but also in terms of kind of proper recognition. And part of that recognition, I think, needs to be bringing in some kind of an income. So that's where I'm at now, and I suppose it's. One of the big struggles too is trying to figure out how to make that space for myself, how to structure a space for thinking critically about what it is that I'm going to do next.
Okay. So can I first hear from those who are listening for emotions? So what emotions, feelings did you hear? Frustration, annoyance, yeah. Hmm. Oh, nostalgia. Hmm. Oh, and lots there. Yeah. Breathless anxiety, insecurity, anger. Yeah. Bitter. Hmm. I thought I also heard a bit of relief in there as well, after the decision was made. So we just got a few people typing now. Hopeful and excited, yes, yeah. Weight lifted, definitely, yeah. Yeah, starting with frustration, but then joy and some confusion at the end. So, yeah, yeah, yeah. Eager, animated, great, yeah. You've found an awful lot. Determined, you found an awful lot when listening for emotion there. So thank you for that. So how about those listening for content? That might just be you, Uta. So, um, but thank you for being in group two. So what did you hear in terms of content? Otter's just writing now. Hmm. The dichotomy between fun and engagement and pay, yes. Genie quantity versus quality. Hmm. Yeah, and I noticed as well that I enjoyed the narrative, and quite a logical narrative, and sense of a journey and of reasoning, and the need to find um, his place in the widest sense of the word. So finally, an intention. What did those listening for intention? Yeah, he wanted an identity, didn't he? Mm. So to find an identity, to make sense of the journey so far. Yeah. Mhm. Looking for an answer. He wasn't happy with the system and wanted his craft to match up with the reward. Mhm. Not happy with the world. Mm. Disagrees with the higher education system, as it is now, and seeking resolution of some kind. Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you for all those contributions. Um, now, a further question for you. How did you find that exercise, and what did you notice about the quality of your listening and attention when you were listening for something specific? You had to be focused and more tuned in. Yes, definitely. Total immersion versus distant looking at, and then I think I'm missing the last word, which is but total immersion. Yes. More focused. Oh, but still found still found myself doing something else at the same time. Okay, so thank you for answering that. Um, so I think this hopefully you've got the sense there of really having to concentrate and focus on what you're listening for, but also I hope you've got a sense of the massive amount of data that there is in the voice, and I think that's clear from all the emotions, particularly that you spotted in there. So let's move on, and thanks again for doing the exercise. So let's move on. So I've included next a couple of quotes from practitioners to illustrate two different observations on virtual working. So in the first quote, the person's talking about using Google Hangouts with her own virtual action learning set. And Google Hangouts, as you probably know, has a visual element if you want to use it. And what she says is, we used Google Hangouts. They all wanted to use video, and that is a normal reaction by most people new to working virtually. They people feel that they really need to see each other in order to be able to understand each other. But she says we quickly got rid of that. They all found it very distracting, so they preferred the audio only. We checked in at the start with video so that everybody saw each other, and then we'd switch it off. So they decided in their group that listening only was much more powerful. The second quote illustrates a different aspect of being seen or not being seen. i.e. using video and audio, or using audio only. And what he says is, in face-to-face action learning, I'm more aware of how I present rather than what I'm understanding or clarifying about what I presented. Now, what I understand him to be saying is that when he's being seen, there's the possibility of a performative element kicking in, and this has the potential to distract him from his reflective process, which is obviously at the core of action learning. So just two quotes there from quite a lot of quotes from practitioners, but I thought they illustrated two different points. So moving on to the benefits of virtual action learning, and these benefits may also apply to other virtual meetings. So as we've said already, the carbon footprint is reduced. Uh, Travel time, cost, and accommodation savings are possible. Using the right protocols and technology and listening skills can improve relationships and the quality of interactions for geographically dispersed groups. It opens the door, working virtually opens the door, allowing more people to be involved in action learning for sure. And you can meet more easily and work more easily across time zones. It encourages diversity and gives new perspectives. And one of the most valuable aspects, as you probably know, of action learning is being invited through questioning to see things from the different perspectives of your peers. So the wider the perspectives, the more effective action learning can be. So working virtually can value local knowledge. I've got a couple of examples here, branding examples where, and you may know them actually, but where foreign companies have tried to sell something in a different country without checking. So the first one is Clairol, launched a curling iron called Mist Stick in Germany, even though mist is German slang for manure. And Uta, you can tell me if that's right or wrong. Another example is Coca-Cola's brand name, when first marketed in China, was sometimes translated as bite the wax tadpole. So they're sort of anecdotal things that I've got from the internet, but you get my point that if you can value local knowledge, you will avoid errors like this. And the final benefit, and there are lots more as well, but the final one on my list is that it encourages expert listening, which is a skill transferable to all areas of work and life. So here are some practical tips from practitioners. And again, some of the points you might also apply to other virtual meetings. So really important to stress this with new virtual groups, and virtual action learning groups. So VAL is neither more nor less effective than face-to-face action learning. It's different. So if you start your a new virtual action learning group saying, well, we can't afford to meet, so we'll just do it by phone, that's probably not going to work. So you need to position it positively. So just make sure you make the point. It's neither more nor less effective, it's different. It's not a conference call. So you might need to be really explicit about the etiquette, the rules of engagement, and point out that what we're doing in virtual action learning may be very different from teleconference etiquette. It's a good idea to ask people what is their experience of teleconferences as you're starting a virtual action learning group. And one of my colleagues at Action Learning Associates did ask this question, and one person in her group said, "Oh, I use the time to catch up with my ironing." So this is this is not the quality of listening and the tuning in deeply that we want. So it's good to make the difference very clear between conference calls and what we're doing in virtual action learning Um, it needs meticulous setup and briefing calls and clearer contracting. So you need briefing calls before you start the virtual action learning set working. And in a briefing call, you would do some contracting, and clearer contracting is needed in advance of that first proper action learning session in order to establish commitments and to enable people to connect with each other in the virtual space. If you're using a technology that has some complexity, then you may also need separate one-to-one calls with each participant with an IT expert or a technical facilitator in order that people feel comfortable with the technology. You need to use and develop experienced virtual action learning facilitators. There's a need to be more explicit. There are sometimes difficulties in terms of intimacy and imagination, and I'll come on to those. There may be a level of anxiety in the group that you'll have to hold as a facilitator. Silence is something that people need to become familiar with in the virtual space, and there may be cultural differences that need to be surfaced. So, as the facilitator, you might need to be more directive. You need to be both in control and sound completely relaxed. And you might need to check in with your action learning set and with the issue holder, the presenter, much more than you would if you were face to face. And you might also need to be bringing in quieter individuals. This is a quote from a direct quote from a practitioner that you need to keep a fanatical focus on the technology. And this is a really important part of the setup, as noted above, in terms of the one-to-one technical calls that we might need to have. Another observation that they made was is that different technologies offer different virtual experiences. So switching technologies mid virtual action learning program might create difficulties. So you need to be aware of that. These two are consequences as well as tips. So become an expert listener and become acutely aware of what's in the voice. And hopefully you've got a glimpse of that today. And here's a tip that we might not think about. So prepare yourself and prepare your physical space very carefully. If you think about it, when you go to a face-to-face meeting, there's some travel time, transit time between leaving home and arriving at the space, and you're sort of mentally preparing as you get there. When you get to the physical space, you're doing greetings, you're taking your coat off, you're just getting yourself a drink, maybe. Um, with virtual working, you might just press the button and be propelled into the space. So preparing yourself mentally and physically is really important. Give yourself some time before the call starts, just to relax, to breathe, to get mentally into the space. And it also helps to clear your desk and check your seating is comfortable. Make sure you're in a quiet and confidential space, and maybe have some water and quiet refreshments. Um, and the last slide here are some of the people that some of the organizations that we've worked with virtually. And just to give you a flavor of the kind of work we've done and how we've applied virtual action learning. With the first one on the list there, Heineken, there was a large development program for 6,000 worldwide first-line managers, I think from 70 countries. And as part of the development program, there was an action learning element. And our role, Action Learning Associates' role, was to train action learning facilitators. And they came from all parts of the business. So we trained over 170, and the training consisted of both face-to-face and virtual work. And what we found was that worldwide relationships were forged across continents and across functions. and national, regional, and local perspectives were shared and really valued. And the participants described um, the action learning element as the glue of the whole program, the thing that held it all together. The next one on the list, the Danish energy company called Dong. Um, we are working at the moment with them. It's a talent management program for senior employees. They have an intense development period with a variety of interventions available to them, and action learning is one of these. So the participants are really talented experts, technical experts. They're not new to managing people, um, but they want to further develop their general management skills and their emotional intelligence. So as I said, we're in the middle of the program, but we're already noticing shifts in behaviors. There's a lot more asking than telling. People feel they're being listened to with attention and empathy, and people are learning from each other in terms of leadership style and management practice. And people are valuing the reflective space in what is a really high pressure, fast, fast paced, and often very reactive working environment. And this program is entirely virtual. British Red Cross, we trained 5 virtual facilitators. They were already accomplished face-to-face facilitators, but we did the whole thing entirely virtually. Similarly with Family First in Bermuda, and similarly with something called the Open Network, which you may or may not know about. Um, it's it consists of people from the various campaigning organisations that we're starting to see more of. In the UK, we have one called 38 Degrees, which you may know about. I think in the States we've got Avaz, and there are quite a few others. So these people are working in cohorts so that everybody, for example, who raises funds or is managing social media campaigns works together, and they're solving their current challenges and learning best practices um, from each other. So they're just a few examples of the people we've worked with virtually and how we're applying virtual action learning. So thank you very much for listening to all of that and for taking part in um, the different exercises. And now we've got time for questions. So any questions that you've got, please take a minute and I'll watch the chat box for the questions. So Nikki's just typing now. How long, this is Siobhan, how long is a good length of time for a virtual action learning session? Probably 3.5 hours is a good time. And in that time, you would probably be able to do 2 really in-depth presentations. There's a little bit of check-in time at the start and a little bit of check-out time at the end, but the meat of the time can be presentations, and you would need a pause in the middle. How many people would be a reasonable number in a VAL set? In a virtual set, probably 6 maximum, plus the facilitator. How do you handle difficult group dynamics that might emerge? Thanks, Liz. Um, I guess it depends what's what is happening. But I think the thing to do, as you would in face to face, is name what's happening. And this certainly works with cultural differences. So with my Danish group, for example, uh, and Jana, you might know the Danes better than I do, but they are very direct, and it can sometimes feel a bit rude. But naming that and actually making it humorous seems to work quite well. But I guess it does depend on what is the difficult dynamic that's happening. Uta, what groups feel more or less comfortable with virtual action learning? Oh, well, there is some research that shows that people who are more introverted in the Jungian sense, so they do their thinking internally rather than externally, prefer working virtually. Um, there's an article that talks about some Finnish people who enjoy working virtually, and it's a very small sample, so I'm not assuming that everybody in Finland is the same. Um, but the Finnish person was saying why she enjoys it is because in a face to face in her face to face meetings where she works, people are very reserved. It's very stilted. But when she's working virtually, she can walk up and down. She can wave her arms around. She can be expressive in a way that she doesn't feel she can be face to face. There's another quote that from one person who said, "I like working virtually because I don't get the usual response to my body image." So different reasons for different people. Jeannie, have you used this technical format for, e.g., listeners type questions to the presenter? I haven't, but one of my practitioners did this. Um, and when they debriefed at the end, the presenter had felt during the questioning um, very anxious, but couldn't find a way to express that. Um, so I think that might typing questions might present difficulties unless you had very clearly contracted, what will happen if kind of thing. So the contract really and the discussing how you work together really important, I think. Siobhan, how would you name it? Do you as facilitator say that sounded rude? Um, if you're talking about what I said earlier with my Danish group, I did say to the English ear that sounds very direct. Um, so yes, name it, but with humor, I think. So do we have any more questions? Oh yeah, Nikki's, I think. I just wait for this question to come up. The silence issue is interesting. How long did it take to become comfortable? Hmm. That is interesting. I think it's a really good idea to, between every stage in the action learning process, to say, can we just take a minute to think so that people have something to do while there's a silence. If there's a silence, say somebody's asked a question and there's silence, as a facilitator, you would need to check after a few moments, are you thinking, or um, do you need something else, or can you just tell me what's going on? And then the presenter who's taken the question can say, oh, yeah, just give me a minute to think, please. So you might need to do more checking than you would face to face because you can't see what's going on for somebody. Do you have any grounding exercises at the beginning to help people be present? Yes, absolutely. Um, we often do a short sort of mindfulness body scan. And this is a really good question, Liz. Thanks for that. But it's if you imagine, so for example, once I had somebody in New York and somebody in St. Petersburg in the same set. So the person in New York was just arriving at work, and the person in St. Petersburg was just about to leave, really, when we started the set. So they're in completely different mental states. So by doing the mindfulness body scan, it sort of helps us all get into the same virtual space, and it works really well. Thank you for that. Uta, how do you handle unstable connections? Um, Yeah, that's a really good one. So working with people in parts of Africa, and I have to say rural Britain, sometimes the phone connections are pretty bad. So again, it's about setting expectations and asking, well, what would we do if we get disconnected? Um, and there are various things that you might do, but it can happen. It's kind of about normalizing it, and there might need to be some catch-ups when people do get back in. And there are preventative measures as well. So um, uh, in African countries, that people will normally connect by mobile. So reminding them to make sure they've got enough credit and to make sure that their batteries are charged is a good preventative measure. So it's 11:57, so we're coming to the end of the webinar. I just have one more survey for you that will really help us. If you have any more questions, my email is there, so please do feel free to get in touch. So I'll switch you now to the survey, and thank you again for listening, and thank you for participating. And it's been a real pleasure to speak to you. I know it's a bit one way, but thank you. Thanks, Yana.